but I see so many posts that have like 5 million views or 10 million views, and it's just like awful information, absolutely terrible. And it's really hard to combat that, especially some people are only consuming short form content, and so half the stuff they see is BS, and then of course they get caught up in this kind of cultishness.
What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do, getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay? All right.
All right, everybody, returning to the show, I have Geoffrey Verity Schofield. This time I said it right. Last time I think I said Schofield or something like that. So I guess first things first, is Mike O'Hearn natty?
Part of what I look at, this is a big one. Wow, right off, you're coming out guns blazing on this one. Part of, because I usually don't do natty or nots, because, and I get sent DMs and stuff. People are like, is this guy natural? And like, usually I just pass because there's no way to tell 100%. Right. But what I usually look for is their reaction to when they get asked or when they get accused.
Yeah.
And if you look at Mike's reaction, whenever it gets brought up, I mean, he either gets super defensive or like really uncomfortable, or he'll be like, no, like this is just people asking because they don't want to put in the hard work or something like that. Whereas if you look at someone who's actually natural and they get that question or they get that accusation, usually it's like they're kind of flattered about it, right? Because it's kind of it's a mix of a few different emotions. Because I've had my fair share of fake natty accusations by now, which is nice, right? It's like you've built up this physique that is worthy of getting this accusation, right? So it's flattering in a way, but then it's also insulting because they're calling you a lying sack of dung, right? So it's like they're praising your physique, insulting your character, and so you're like, I guess I feel good about this, but like it depends who it is, right? Because if it's a nobody, it's kind of flattering. But if there was someone who I respected in the industry and they said, oh yeah, that GVS guy, he's a fake natural, I would actually be more like hurt / insulted by that.
Yeah.
Because now they're saying like, it's more about like, oh, he's a lying, bag of crap. And then it's also a little bit sad as well, because usually these people have really low standards. And so they think anyone who has an even halfway decent physique is automatically sauced up. Especially the ones who actually sauced up themselves.
Yeah.
The ones who they went down that road, they didn't see great results. Either they didn't know what they were doing in the gym, or they didn't put in hard work, or their diet was crappy, or they're just using the anabolics as a way to get around the hard work, which happens way, way more commonly than most people in the fitness industry think. Those are the guys who get salty because they see someone who looks better than them, and they automatically think, oh, well, this guy must have taken more drugs. And then you say you're natural, and they're just like, no. Like, they can't accept that because it shows, their inadequacies, basically. So Mike O'Hearn, I'm going to go with no based on his reaction. And then just based on his physique and his longevity. And I think he's a little bit in too deep. I think that's, he's more mainstream than a lot of people in the fitness industry. And so it's almost like guys who are actors. A lot of these actors, we know they're not natural. They know they're not natural, but they can't say they're not natural because it's still illegal in the US. So they can't exactly say that. And then there is the situation of, if they are too open about it, now they're going to be, incentivizing and inspiring their young fans to go down the same path, which, maybe they know is not the right road for most people. So Mike O'Hearn, almost certainly not natural, partly based on his physique, but the other factors as well.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, but one thing that I just enjoy talking about it because it's always funny, and everybody, it's kind of like, we know he's lying, he knows he's lying, we all know he's lying, but he just has to keep the game going. One person I know you've kind of butted heads with a little bit, and I like him for some things and less for others. Greg Doucette, I feel like actually almost walks a fine line, like tips over to a little bit more irresponsibility than responsible, but is at least honest about PED stuff, where like I said, it's I think he falls a little bit more towards the irresponsible end because he really is very, very open about it and kind of goes into all the details and names of drugs and everything that maybe some people think like, hey, this is a good idea and this is what it is, so I just have to look this stuff up to get it. Where he does say like, hey, you shouldn't take this, but like, to me, it still seems kind of irresponsible to constantly blast that stuff out and do natty or nots and then say, hey, this is what they're taking. These are the doses. And it may encourage some people to say, hey, maybe I should go try that too.
Yeah, I mean, you have to wonder how many thousands upon tens of thousands of young men have taken steroids because of they watched a natty or not on their dream physique. And the guy said, oh, there's no way this is natural. This is what they're taking. This is where you get it. And, Greg is a mixed bag. Obviously, we've had our differences for sure. It's not all bad by any means. I try to always be intellectually honest, even if it's someone you don't like. And I don't like Greg. I'm not going to like sugarcoat. I don't like him. I really, really do not like him. But at the same time, I have to recognize that he has also done good. And there's a reason why, he's as popular as he is. So it is a mixed bag. There is some good, some bad. It is a fine line to walk. And, let's face it, he does natty or nots because people want to watch natty or nots.
Oh, yeah, they love
He's been very upfront about that. He tries to sneak in educational content as well, which I do appreciate and I do notice. So maybe it's partly his fault. Maybe it's because there is no science of natty or not, right? Like it's at the end of the day, you don't know. For a lot of these guys who are in the gray zone, some guys you look at them and you're like, okay, it's not natural. Obviously, no one actually thought Liver King was natural, right? I mean, no one in the fitness industry knew this kind of stuff. No one was like, I don't know. I mean, look at the guy. The skin, the amount of muscle mass, like it's pretty clear. So, but for that gray zone, which is where the most interesting natty or nots are. You don't actually know. Maybe you can look at the progress, see if there were any big jumps in muscle mass or something. Maybe you could look for potential side effects or something. But at the end of the day, you don't know for sure. And there are a lot of ridiculous, actually natural physiques.
Russell or
where you look at them and you're like, yeah, like, I mean, I've seen some guys where 5 years ago, I would have been like, not natural. But after developing myself to a decent level, now I look at these physiques and I'm like, I'm not that far off. Like I'm 5 or 10, maybe 15 pounds of muscle away from some of these guys, and they've been training for 5, 6, 7, 8 years longer than I have. I've been training about 8 years, 8.5 years. So I think you can do a lot more naturally than most people think if you really put time into it. If someone dedicates themselves to it. Most people would be surprised, not just what is naturally possible for the elite, the genetic elite, but just for the average person, if they really devote themselves to it, I mean, they can get a physique that they would probably call themselves not natural if they saw themselves in the future, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I've been training for I first started working out consistently in like probably 7th grade, which was probably 12, maybe even like, I want to say probably like 15 years ago for me, something like that. And then I stopped. And then in like 9th grade, and I'm 28 now. So, I mean, years and years and years and years that I've been training. And I really didn't get serious until about, I would say 2019, maybe 2020. And then like if you would have told me back then that I would have deadlifted, 500 pounds for 2 reps at 188 pounds, I would have been like, no fucking way. There's absolutely no way. But it's kind of like you said, it's the matter of consistency, knowing what you're doing, constructing your training correctly. And then one thing that actually really helped me out, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I think you do a little bit this as well, is actually training to failure. Because like when you never do it, you don't know how much more you have left in the tank until you start going balls to the walls. So then you kind of have to walk that fine line of like, hey, I need to train to failure so I know where my breaking point is. And then I have to figure out how I can leave 2 left in the tank, because it seems like most research suggests that you can get the same benefit as going to failure if you kind of leave a few left in the tank for like most exercises from what I understand of the literature. So kind of curious about your thoughts on like kind of gauging going from a novice to like intermediate, maybe even advanced.
Yeah, so you said something really interesting. You said, you've been training for what, 15 years or so?
Mm-hmm.
But how many years of that are like on point, the diet and the sleep and the stress and with the good structure? Probably like two or three or
probably 4 at most.
4.
And that's being pretty generous.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I would say for myself, I'm like 8.5 years in. How many years have I had it like really dialed in? Yeah, 2. Like 2 years where I was fully, I can look back at those years and be like, yeah, like you actually nailed those.
Mm-hmm.
And you can take, of course, the occasional day off, the occasional week off, a couple times a year. That's actually probably beneficial.
Yeah.
But 95% of the time, getting into the gym and working hard at least 3 to 4 days a week, basically. That consistency really does help a lot. So I would say I have 2 years of that, and then 6 years of like okay, hard training, really pushing myself, but not quite as dedicated as devoted. And a lot of that is the training to failure, or training close to failure. And I look back at a lot of my old clips from like 2016, 17, 18, even into 2019, and they weren't actually as close to failure as I thought. Mm-hmm. So I thought, oh man, like that was really hard. There's no way I had one more. Then I look back at them now and I'm like, okay, yeah, I probably had 4 or 5 left. And the debate about 0 versus 2 reps in reserve, I think it's complex. There are a lot of factors that go into that. So I don't think it's as simple as 2 reps in reserve equals 0 reps in reserve. A lot of it is going to be your level of advancement and what you've been doing recently. Mm-hmm. So if someone is a beginner, I would actually fully agree. You don't need to train to failure. It might not even be particularly beneficial. It might not be worse, but I don't think there's anything special there. Just because as a beginner, you're so sensitive to training that 2 reps in reserve is good enough. Right. I wouldn't necessarily do 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 reps in reserve, because at that point it's so easy that you're kind of just leaving gains on the table, even as a beginner, right? Mm-hmm. But for a beginner, a true 2 to 3 reps in reserve is very, very good going. However, it has to be a true 2 to 3 reps in reserve, because a lot of people, again, they think it's 2 to 3 reps in reserve. It's actually, when you say, hey, gun to your head, how many more can you do? They did 5 reps the first set, and then they're like, let's go, like really push. And, you're egging them on and stuff, and they get 12 reps the second set. And you're just like, well, the first set didn't do anything. It was a warm-up, essentially. You were at least 7 reps in reserve. And you can train this ability over time. And this is actually a lot of where continued progression can come from. Because you get your newbie gains through training that is certainly not brutal, just, moderate, reasonable, not, gut busting or anything like that. But if you want to go further, you have to give more. Right. There's a cost to achieving a great physique. And there's nothing wrong with staying, a lifetime intermediate. A lot of people who are advanced, they kind of look down on lifetime intermediates, but there's nothing wrong with being intermediate. If anything, you've gotten a good amount of growth without much investment, either in terms of your time, in terms of your effort, in terms of your knowledge. Like, it doesn't take that much to go from beginner to intermediate.
Yeah.
But if you want to keep going, and this is where it's important that people are honest with themselves, because a lot of people who are intermediate, they think they're advanced and they're at some kind of genetic limit.
Yeah.
When in reality, they are intermediate and they've stalled because they are either not putting in the work, or they're not willing to gain any weight and they're still lean, or they just haven't learned anything new about training. They're not experimenting and trying new things and seeing what works for them. So many people are just not observant when it comes to their training, right? They'll DM their favorite fitness influencer and be like, what should I do? What's the best way to grow your chest? Well, how about you try some stuff, observe, go by feel, try to use your intuition and observation to find out your muscle growth hypertrophy system. And a lot of people don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because it is going to be more investment of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so going back to the reps and reserve thing, when you're intermediate, you're probably going to have to train closer to failure than you were as a beginner.
Right.
And when you're advanced, you might get to the point where 4 or 5 reps in reserve just isn't really scratching that itch of muscle growth.
Yeah.
Your body might just be like, yeah, we're not going to grow. It's just not doing enough for us, right? And then, when you're truly elite, I think that's where you might get to the point where you really have to be getting to those really tough, grindy reps, possibly even beyond failure type stuff, if you really want to, keep progressing. So it does depend on your level of advancement because of your sensitivity to the training, as well as how close you are to your hypothetical ceiling, whatever that might be.
What's up, everybody? We're going to take a quick break and tell you about the show's sponsors. We are brought to you by LMNT electrolytes. I've been using this stuff for years, and what I've honestly found is that if I didn't have electrolytes before some kind of cardio, and sometimes even before workouts, that my workout performance, or definitely cardio performance, would suffer greatly. Sodium is responsible for every single movement pretty much in your entire body, and let's say you drink a lot of caffeine like I like to do, then maybe it is a good idea, like I do every single morning, put some LMNT chocolate electrolytes there in your coffee to get a little bit more sodium, potassium, and magnesium in your coffee, so that way whatever diuretic effect you get from the caffeine is pretty much diluted by the fact that you put chocolate salt in it. Also, it tastes really, really good. Get some chocolate cream or hazelnut cream or even coconut, and mix that all up. It tastes really, really good. So make sure you drop by, go to drinklmnt.com/inlibertyandhealth and pick you up some electrolytes today. All right, guys, thanks.
Right. Furthermore, I think exercise selection, super important here, right? So if someone keeps 2 reps in reserve on something like a barbell back squat, fair enough, right? It's a big movement. It's a compound movement. There is a higher risk, not necessarily, super risky, as long as your technique is good and you've adapted to it.
Right. But
let's face it, you're going to have a higher risk of injury on a barbell back squat taken to failure than something like a chest supported row. They're different movements. They need to be treated differently. And so if someone keeps 2 reps in reserve on a barbell back squat, fair enough. Another factor is that it's loaded at the bottom of the movement. So you look at something like an RDL, you look at something like a barbell back squat, you look at something like a barbell bench press. All big movements, all ego-driven movements, which might be part of it as well. A lot of people are not pushing their accessories, and so that's exactly where they should be pushing. And so those barbell movements, they are most taxing at the bottom part of the range of motion, the stretched part of the range of motion, the lengthened part of the range of motion, which I would say means you don't necessarily need to be training as close to failure because you're already hitting that huge stimulus of putting the stretch on the muscle. Whereas if something is more of a shortened position, emphasized movement, so a lot of rows, they are toughest in that contracted position. You look at something like a chest supported row, it might depend if it's a machine. Some of them are loaded slightly differently. But if you look at something just like a dumbbell chest supported row, you put your chest on an incline bench, then you row up. Well, the very bottom is very, very easy. I mean, you could hold massive amounts of weight with your arms outstretched.
Yeah.
Right. But the hardest part is that last little part of the range of motion, that last little bit of scapular retraction and the arm bend is where you will fail. So if you take a set of chest supported rows, genuinely to failure, technical failure, it means you're only failing this tiny little piece, this little sliver of the range of motion. Because the minute you can't get full range of motion, according to the literature, and these guys who are emphasizing reps in reserve, that is failure. If you're doing a pull down or a pull up, and you barely can't get that last little part of the range of motion, which is the toughest, that is failure. I personally say F that, and I just keep going.
Right.
So I failed, but I don't see any reason to not take another rep. It might only be 95% of the range of motion of the rep I just got, even though I'm trying, to squeeze the back as hard as I can. But I don't see any issue with that. And I've adapted to training that way. And sometimes I'll just keep going until I am -5 reps in reserve, or -8 reps in reserve, or even -10 reps in reserve. I've had sets, and I don't necessarily recommend this to everyone, but I've had sets where I probably failed with technical failure in strict form on rep 5 or 6, and I just kept going until I got 20 reps. And so by the end, I can, that's where you can actually only barely bend your arms because you failed here, you failed here, you failed here, you failed every little piece of the range of motion, and then now you're actually failing at the top. And so it is much, much more fatiguing, which is bad. Fatigue's not good, but it's also much, much more stimulatory. And so if you have hit a plateau, this might be something worth considering. Another option might be something like cheat reps, where you go to failure with strict form, and then you allow yourself just a little bit of cheat on something like a pull down, just a little bit of momentum. And this has to be controlled. Most people who do cheat reps, they mess it up on a massive scale. You can just see these guys, they're cheating to use more weight.
Right.
They're cheating because they were never using strict form, right? From the very first rep, they're doing like, who knows what. It's hips, it's spinal erector, it's, glute, it's hamstring, who knows what it is. It's abdominal at the very end. They're trying to crunch the weight down. That is not good for muscle growth. That's a waste of time. Probably also a higher risk of injury, just because you're flopping around, you're flailing around, you're slamming the weight out into that top stretch position, which can mess up the shoulders and the elbows. So, but if you cheat well, if you cheat under control, you're cheating just enough where you can get full range of motion, but no more. You're cheating where it is still challenging for the muscles that you're trying to work. That can be extremely beneficial as well. Now, I wouldn't recommend this for beginners because it's just not needed, and because they'll probably mess it up. But once you're intermediate, this might be worth considering. And certainly once you're advanced, I think some controlled momentum on some movements can be extremely beneficial. And a lot of these guys who are obsessed with strict form, they will kind of dismiss cheat reps as just ego lifting, or just people who want to move a lot of weight, or people who can't do strict form. But in reality, while that is the majority of people who cheat, it's certainly not everyone. And I think that is being intellectually dishonest, because not all cheating is the same.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you laid out there. And especially with like the cheat reps, the thing that I think of is when I watch people do lateral raises, I see people with a 90-degree arm bend and they're sitting there doing this, but really it should be concentrated. And then if you need to, do a little bit of cheating to get it up, that's going to be very stimulatory, and it's going to help you get to those, more fatiguing reps, which are going to give your muscles a greater stimulus. But if you're sitting there flopping around the entire time, then clearly you can't handle the weight. And I see people doing stuff like this, or like the real small range of motion with the chest press. It's like, no, you should do the full range of motion, lower the weight so you can get more reps. And then if you get closer to failure, okay, that's fine. But like, you shouldn't do your entire set cheating. It should be concentrated, or like you said, with a lateral pull down, chest up and then pull down. And then if you need to on those last reps, then start cheating. It shouldn't be the entire set is cheated, because once again, you're not hitting the target muscle.
Yeah, 100%, spot on. And you can see it, right? Like if I'm coaching someone part of the time I have people take weight off the bar, right? Like they're doing their weighted pull-ups, but then they're like kipping with their legs from the start. It's like, why are you even adding weight? So it's like, okay, we're back to body weight. And they're like, back to body weight? Oh no, like this is, oh, my ego. Oh, it hurts. But for a lot of people, that's what they need,
Right.
you know. But on the other hand, on some movements, I can tell if the person is getting more out of the set because they're using a slight amount of momentum, right? Like maybe on something like a cable lateral raise, they're leaning into it a little bit on some reps. They are, you know, using a little bit of hips in the movement, not necessarily from the start, but it's still controlled. A good rule of thumb is that if you can't start the movement and finish the movement with the target muscle, then it's probably just either too much weight or too far beyond failure, right? So on something like a cable lateral raise, you should still feel that delt stretch at the bottom. And you should still feel that finish at the top of the movement. Even if it's not the very top, where you can't get that full contraction, you should still feel that side delt work as high as you can. If you're kind of just like flopping around, it's probably not doing much for you. And I think that's where it could be injurious.
Yeah. It is, like I said, interesting to watch people kind of at the gym, and I try not to judge, and sometimes you just want to be like, hey man, just lower the weight. Like nobody really cares how much you're lifting, just do it right and you'll see much more results. Like I find myself lowering weights not like all the time, but you know, you kind of have to take a mental note in your mind, say like, okay, am I going through the full range of motion, or am I just lifting this because I want to lift it? Like sometimes it sucks lowering the weight, because to do the full range of motion it fucking hurts, but you know at the end of the day that's going to be a greater stimulus. So like one thing that I've started doing recently over the last couple months, because I had a little back injury, is that now I pretty much exclusively do trap bar deadlifts, which everybody says, oh, that's not a real deadlift. Well, if you have a back injury and it irritates the fuck out of your lower back to do a regular barbell deadlift, maybe it's okay to do this for like a mesocycle, or maybe for a few months and say, hey, I'm going to get really good at this, and then I'm going to go back to barbell deadlifting. Like just like the stigma around some certain lifts and different stuff like that, I'm like, it's not necessary, and it doesn't help, because maybe someone could see a lot of benefit from maybe changing up for a certain period of time and then going back to the traditional lift or a different lift.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think it's getting better. I genuinely think it's getting better. Good. 10 years ago, well, maybe not 10 years ago, I've only been lifting 8.5 years, but when I first started lifting, there was a lot of really, really dogmatic thinking, and there still is. Yeah. But it's gotten better. If you used to do neck training, you'd end up on a gym fail page. If you're doing, your neck flexions on the bench with the plate on your head, people would be giving you weird looks. Nowadays, I think it's pretty normal. The Smith machine, I mean, that got absolutely shat on a lot of forums. You're not working. Are you stabilizers? Oh no, what are you going to do? Like, what's going to happen in real life when you don't have, it's not on a fixed track?
You're going to tear a quad.
Yeah, exactly. And so, speaking of tearing, I tore my QL a little over a year ago, and actually kind of opened the door to experiment with new movements. I do think exercise variation and variability is very powerful. And so many people, they get stuck in this minimalist thinking where it's like, oh, I can only do these movements. Only barbells, maybe dumbbells, that's it. Well, cables can be extremely, extremely beneficial. Ring training, I've been getting into that. I like them so much, I wrote a whole book on them. Like, I was shocked at how effective they were. And I would have written those off 3-4 years ago. It's like, oh, some calisthenics bullshit. I have actually an answer on Quora where I was like, calisthenics are never going to build muscle. Like, this is like, it's never going to work. And then, a few years later, I have a freaking book about it. Like, and so I think some people get more dogmatic as they get older. Other people get less dogmatic. I found that for whatever reason, I fall into the second category, and it's been extremely, extremely beneficial, for my muscular growth, but also, for my growth as a content creator and as a coach. And just trying new things, having more tools in your toolbox, super beneficial. The trap bar is another good example where, people used to be, you see the old guard, I won't name any names, like you can only do your fives, Okay, everyone knows who I'm talking about. You can only do your fives, and you can't use the trap bar because of like the front to back instability or something.
Mhm.
And that could be a benefit. A lot of what people think is a bug is actually a feature, right? Like having more stability could be good. Having less stability could also be good. Like there's a time and a place for a lot of different tools. So I'm definitely on team trap bar. I think it's a great option. High handles, low handles, power shrugs, farmer's walks. I don't like them for rows for whatever reason,
Mhm.
but some people do, and they can try that. I actually did a video on the trap bar. One thing I would not advise are I saw a guy doing squats. So he was holding the
Oh
trap bar
God.
around here and doing squats like that, like some kind of bastardized front squat or something. Thing is, like with a back squat, if you fail, you can dump the bar behind you. With a
Oh,
front squat, you can dump the bar in front of you. If you fail with the trap bar, you
yeah.
are
You're choking.
yeah, like I don't know what you're gonna do, but it's
Yeah.
not gonna end well. And so I saw that, and it's like one of those examples of people putting out content without thinking about it for
Mhm.
like 10 seconds about what could go wrong, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm on Team Trap Bar for sure. Actually, my current gym doesn't have one, which kind of sucks. Um, but it's a valuable tool if someone has access to it for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, I've actually taken a real big liking to doing RDLs with the trap bar, especially over the barbell, because I just find that it's a lot more comfortable. And like I said, I injured my back because I wasn't really focused on form. I was doing way too much ego for deadlifting, and man, I'll never forget how bad that sucked getting out of the car, and I'm like, oh. And then
Yeah.
yeah, and forever I used to not bench press, and then over the last like year I started bench pressing again. I'm like, oh well, no wonder my chest is always lacked, is because I'm not putting sufficient weight to my chest. But it's just because you hear a bro once tell you, oh, bench pressing's bad for your shoulder, don't do it, and then you abstain from it for years and years and years, and then you realize, holy shit, I left all this on the table. So there's just a lot of this dogma, and I don't think it helps anybody, and it goes to the nutrition realm as well.
Oh, it's worse than the nutrition, I think. I think it's because we all eat, and so
Mhm.
everyone has an opinion on diet.
Yeah.
And it's also so individual. The training is individual, but diet is like, I mean, completely individual.
Mhm.
Most of the differences in training that we like to argue about on the internet, I mean, they're pretty small differences in the grand scheme of things. Like, lift hard, lift heavy, 5 to 30 reps for hypertrophy. We're quibbling over like 2 reps in reserve or 0 reps in reserve or 3 reps in reserve. Like, at the end of the day, even for me, what I know myself really well, sometimes I don't know if that was 3 or 4 reps in reserve. Like I
Mhm.
finished set, right? And I
Yeah.
don't do 3 to 4 reps very often. But maybe on something like a barbell back squat, sometimes I'm like, did I have 1 left or 2 left? And I'm not 100% sure. And
Mhm.
so, sometimes we're arguing about something where most people can't even measure it,
Right.
right? Because unless you know yourself really well, is that RPE 8.5 or 9? Like it's a little bit blurry at times. But nutrition, I mean, you have people who are like carnivore, the ultimate diet. And other people who are like vegan is the ultimate diet. And so the average person goes in there and is like, I mean, basically whatever they stumble across first, and whoever is the most charismatic is like the diet they fall into, right? And
Mhm.
again, we all eat, and so we all have an opinion on diet. And then it's also so individual that someone who is very charismatic and influential
Mhm.
might be someone who responds really well to low carb dieting. And so suddenly that's the thing that is the thing for everyone, right? And so
Mhm.
they're selling this idea, or sometimes just selling a book or selling something. And this is suddenly the cure, the solution for everyone, which is, I mean, it's moronic when you think about it, but most people don't, right? They don't actually question something. They just sort of get caught up in the marketing. And so they're like, oh, this is the diet for me. This is the ultimate human diet. Well, you're going to have to experiment with a few things
Right.
and see what you respond best to. I mean, it's similar to training, at least in that regard.
Mhm.
But a lot of people are not willing to do that. And so you get these people who they get swept up into veganism and they feel like shit, but they don't want to admit it because then it's
Mhm.
like they failed or something.
Yeah.
And they feel like they failed even if maybe it was a lack of B vitamins or something, right? Or maybe, they get caught up in carnivore and they're like, oh, vegetables are bad. Vegetables are killing you. Fruits, never eat a fruit. Oh, lectins, bad. And, they're actually kind of sabotaging themselves because they would be better off with a more moderate approach, but moderation doesn't sell.
No, God,
You
no.
can, you're never going to make money preaching hard work and moderation, right? Like, I'll probably never be a fitness millionaire, but, at the end of the day, I'm okay with that, because I'm not that materialistic anyway. So it's like, it works out. But if you really want to make a shitload of money in the fitness industry, you're not going to make it with moderation. Like, it's just not, it's just not the way to go.
No, it's kind of crazy to me because I've been swatting some of the artificial sweetener and the seed oil stuff lately, just because like that is like the big push now. Like, oh, artificial sweeteners are killing your gut. They're making you more hungry and you're eating more. And then seed oils are the enemy of everything. It's like, I don't think you guys ever like really looked into any of this stuff, because all the experts that are like in this field, all the research that's been done on all of these, they'll pretty much tell you straight up like this stuff's not that bad. And I see somebody I think we both kind of know and like, sort of, who's a growing channel who's started to kind of push some of this stuff too. And I'm like, come on, man, you provided some good information, but like, I don't know, just giving people orthorexia over ingredients to me is just like the dumbest shit in the world. And this is what a lot of those fitness and nutrition influencers will do, is they'll give people essentially orthorexia by telling them you have to avoid this because this is killing you. Like Paul Saladino is always the one that I think of first, because he's running in the store shirtless, throwing vegetables on the ground, saying this is bullshit. It's like, dude, fuck that. Like, include these foods if you can include them. But I mean, if they don't sit with you well, then obviously avoid them. But like seed oils, artificial sweeteners, sugar, saturated fat to perhaps a lesser degree, like this stuff's not that bad for you, just as long as you're not gorging on sugar and protein shakes for the entirety of your diet, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, no, it's and again, moderation is not going to sell. And I find Saladino the most interestingly named person of all time, because he's got the word salad in his name, and not a fan of those. So, shout out to Mom and Pop Saladino for raising. I guess maybe he just didn't like salads as a kid, and so he grew up to be a meat eater or something. But at the end of the day, I know some people who do thrive on a fairly carnivore-esque diet, and as long as someone is like, hey, this works for me and it might work for you, fair enough, I have zero issues with that. That's almost never what it actually is, especially with the rise of short form content. You look at TikTok, you look at Instagram Reels, you look at YouTube Shorts, there's just no time for nuance. It's like you have a few seconds to capture someone's attention. And so, vilifying foods that everyone is already eating is going to be something that takes off. I think it's actually more than the time that you have to capture someone's attention. It is the fact that it's just that more people engage with extreme content, right? Like 5 tips to lose weight. And it's like, eat vegetables, get your sleep. It's just like basic stuff. It's just, there's no virality, if you will. It's not gonna take off. And this is part of the reason why I don't make short form content, just because I don't know how I would be successful with it. You have to title things in a way that is inflammatory, provocative, clickable to the point where it's usually clickbait. And I would feel like I would have to apologize for the title in the first few seconds, and then it just wouldn't go anywhere anyway. So I kind of just stick to longer form stuff. And some people have successfully done short form content where it is more nuanced. I think if you're doing myth busting and your title is sort of grabbed from someone else's BS title and it's in quotes or something and you're responding to it, I think that's fair enough. But I see so many posts that have like 5 million views or 10 million views, and it's just like awful information, absolutely terrible. And it's really hard to combat that, especially some people are only consuming short form content, and so half the stuff they see is BS. And then of course, yeah, they get caught up in this kind of cultishness.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned TikTok, and I think before we closed out last time, we were kind of talking about that. But yeah, like the short form content is good for like the too long didn't read generation, which is most of like I believe you're probably around the same age as me. I just turned 28 back in November. So like a lot of our generation does just want to click and watch and then just keep swiping through. So when you have somebody, I think Lane Norton does some shorter form content. He's somebody that I really look up to and admire because he's good at dispelling bullshit. But you know, as they say, it literally takes seconds to spit out bullshit and then takes a much longer time to dispel bullshit.
Yeah, cleaning it up is the tough job. Yeah, for sure. I'm almost 34. I'll be 34 in about a month. So I guess I'm lucky in a way that I didn't grow up with this kind of short form content. I mean, I've seen like kids where they literally have two phones and they're swiping on two phones, and like one is a game and the other is a video or something, and you know, they're just like fucking dialed in to this, and oh man, like you can just tell they're going to be, maybe not 100% chance, but they're going to be messed up probably as an adult, just because they won't be able to. I mean, delayed gratification, super freaking important. I mean, in so many areas of life, being able to say, hey, I know I could do this thing that is pleasurable and enjoyable, or this other thing, which might not be pleasurable and enjoyable right now, but it'll get me to my goals. I mean, if you look at most successful people in life, they have that ability. And, you know, I think if you have this culture where you're just always swiping for the next thing and it's always right there in literally milliseconds, I mean, it's really tough to cultivate that ability to delay gratification and be able to actually make long-term progress as a human being. And so, man, I don't want to say for sure this next generation is going to be messed up, because I'm sure every generation has said that about the next generation the past 200 freaking years. And things tend to, I don't know, they seem to work out. But man, things do seem to be accelerating. And now you have AI, so kids aren't going to have to do their homework. They're just fucking asking ChatGPT, do my fucking homework, bitch. So, I mean, yeah, like teachers are going to be at a crossroads. Like, how do you check to see if a human being actually wrote this? How do you regulate that? College application essays, you know, what is the role of education in our society? And I mean, our math teachers, I don't know if you've heard this, but they used to say, oh, you'll never have a calculator in your pocket. Well, yeah, okay, that didn't, like, so you know, technology, it can help, but it can definitely also hurt. Like, for example, most Chinese people, it's something called TB Wangzi. So it's basically lift the pen and then you forget how to write the character. And this is because people don't write characters very much. And so you won't forget very common characters or your name or something. But you might forget slightly obscure characters. You know, out of the top 3,000 characters that you don't write that often, or you don't type that often. But because you're always typing it on your phone, which doesn't involve drawing, usually it involves like spelling out the romanticized pinyin, it's called, and then you recognize the character and you select it, and that's how you type. But that's not the same as writing, right? So you're typing it in and then you're recognizing it and you're clicking it. That's not the same as actually having to go through all the strokes yourself and actually write out the character. So a lot of people nowadays they're just forgetting how to write, which didn't happen before this technology. So I think people's memories are going to get kind of sus. I think people's ability to read, to just read a book, is going to be, and I've actually found this myself, maybe from being on social media and as a content creator and just getting, you know, constant stimulation. I struggle to read. I struggle to read more than like 5 minutes at a time. Because I'll have DMs, I'll have emails, I'll have everything. So I've had to be really strict myself with closing down where I do certain tasks to where I'm not working all the time. So emails will be morning, DMs will be, morning, but it won't be constant.
Right.
Like I'll put my phone away and work on something else, and it'll be away, like out of sight in another room maybe. And then I'll check DMs again, at a later time. When I'm training, I don't check DMs typically, and then I'll check them when I'm walking around a little bit. But man, it can get overwhelming to the point where it really does mess up your attention span. And I think it's something you have to be proactive with, at least if you want to retain and maintain being a functional human being. But these kids growing up, maybe they've never learned, or they never will learn, that ability to do that. And so their new normal is going to be like just, hyper vigilant and always focusing on the new thing and always trying to get that dopamine release. And so I don't know, I'm not worried, but I am kind of interested in how things are going to go.
Yeah. As a musician, I'm intrigued by AI, and I'm also kind of optimistic because I feel like the cream of the crop's going to rise a lot more, and it's not going to take that much work to put out something unique. So the one story I always tell on the podcast when I'm talking to people about AI is that, like, my singer in my band, Jen, I remember when we recorded our first 4-song EP, the engineer was trying to like pitch correct her, and he stopped. He's like, look, I could fuck with this all day, but you're like so spot on that I can't do anything with it. So like in my mind, I'm like, she worked for that and she earned that. So like the people who are willing to put in the work, put in the time, put in the effort, they'll still come out on top no matter what, because an AI will never be able to get the same like breath, the same personality in the way a guitar may play, or, even like certain lifts and stuff like that. So like, I guess this would kind of throw it back to your expertise and kind of what we're both interested in is like an AI will never be able to coach an individual. Like they may be able to give you like a general idea of programming, but like everyone's physiognomy and physiology is going to be a little bit different. So like you're still going to have somewhat personal coaching. Like you're still going to have a one-on-one connection with somebody for them to kind of walk you through all this stuff, unless we get to some sort of AI that can tell joint angles and all this stuff from looking at you from the side. But I don't think that technology is going to be there for a very, very, very long time, if at all.
I am stoked to tell you guys about the show's new sponsor. I am now working with MTS Nutrition, which is a brand that I've believed in for a very long time, and they run awesome cells and they have awesome products. So I want to tell you about their amazing protein powder, which you're going to ask me how many pounds I have of the protein powder, and the answer is all of them. So here I got red velvet cake, 25 grams of protein, and they have the amino acids and everything on there, 59 servings. Peanut butter fluff, Fluffernutter, 26 grams of protein, and then also the chocolate chip cookie, which literally has real pieces of chocolate chip cookie in there. So 27 grams of protein, 180. As I've talked about on the show, getting your protein in is very, very important. So make sure you hit that link below and purchase your protein powder through MTS Nutrition. Boom!
Yeah, I'm not worried about. I've been asked that a few times, and people are like, "Are you worried about AI replacing you?" No, not at all. But if I was a coach where, my sales pitch was like, I can tell you your macros, yeah, you're screwed. Like you're done. You've probably already been phased out. There are apps that can do that. Macro Factor, Carbon. I mean, there's a bunch of them where, if that was your sales pitch, like I can tell you what ratio of carbs to fat, like it was never really a thing that people could do exactly anyway. Yeah. And even now, like I think that's going to be replaced. And so, yeah, the bar just gets higher. But if you are in the top few percent of anything, I mean, I have job security. I'm not worried. I mean, there's 8 or 9 billion people on the planet. And the idea that I couldn't find, a few dozen to coach is like, I can't even imagine that situation. Like it's almost laughable because I usually don't mention my coaching in videos because it causes too much demand. So I, plug the shit out of my books, but I don't mention coaching. And so if I ever like needed that, I could just, mention it once and then, that would be fine. I think we will probably get to the point where it will correct your form. But form is pretty individual. inform. Sometimes it's not just the joint angles or how someone's moving. You do have to talk to them, and you do have to have experience with people who are similar to them. And there's a lot that goes into it. And so I don't think AI is going to be tackling that anytime soon.
Mhm.
And the AI training plans that I've seen, actually, someone said that they put my book through ChatGPT today, and it spit out a training plan, and it was okay.
Mhm.
It wasn't terrible, which, I mean, I guess it's a good sign. It's kind of a pat on the back of me because it's my book that went through it. But it, it wasn't perfect. Like, there were a few things where I kind of raised my eyebrows at. The progression was super aggressive. It was like, add 10 to 20% weight per week. And I'm like, what the fuck? That's, if you're more advanced, 10 to 20% in a year is good going, let alone per week. And so I think AI is not quite there. The hype is certainly there.
Yeah.
And I think that it will be accelerating. If you look at the differences between, Chat GPT 1, 2, 3, 4, it does seem to be gaining in capabilities pretty damn quickly. And if someone is, I mean, it's like robotics. If someone is a McDonald's worker or something, I mean, yeah, that is probably, or a factory worker or something like that. Like, that could be replaced. But in terms of coaching or content creation, yeah, I don't think, I mean, unless someone makes a Jeff AI that, makes videos and it's like no one can tell the difference. But that's okay, because then I could just sue their asses. So,
Right. So one thing that you kind of touched on there earlier when we were talking about TikTok and short form content is the delaying of gratification, which I'm sure you know just as well as I do, as a more trained athlete, that you kind of have to learn to live with a lot more. And even like this goes to diet. So like when my wife or I want to go out and have like a nice dinner or something like that, like we want to go to the Cheesecake Factory or something like that, then I have to say in my mind, like, okay, I'm going to eat very, 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 very sparingly throughout the day. I'm going to be very hungry. And then I'm going to get the reward later on in the day. Same deal when it comes to training. Like, you're going to have to work very, very hard, and, you're going to have to bulk and not like the way that you look maybe at certain points of the year to finally put on significant mass. And then remember, like, oh, well, when I cut down, I'm going to look this much better. And it's not always going to be notable year to year to year, but over time, that's going to make a difference. Like for me, I didn't start training my legs seriously until just a couple years ago. And like at first, I didn't see anything. And then now it's like, oh, well, when I'm doing 315 pounds for reps, my quads look 10 times better than they did 4 years ago. But it's just because that delaying of gratification, not, just saying, well, my legs don't look like, Ronnie Coleman's right now, so fuck it, I'm done. It took time.
Yeah, 100%. And, training, especially naturally, is really like the ultimate form of delayed gratification, especially when you get more advanced. And in some ways, it's nice because beginners don't know how good they have it in some cases. Right? Like, they plateaued week to week once, and they're like, oh my God, I used the same weight 2 weeks in a row. Once, like, and then the next week it was fine, and they're kind of like freaking out because this one time they couldn't progressively overload. But when you're more advanced, I mean, that's like, it becomes a little bit more difficult to actually track progress. You have to be very, very observant, with how something felt, or like getting an extra rep here, or maybe, something felt slightly better. And so you really do have to be observant, and you have to realize, it's going to take a long time, right? Because the more gains you get, the tougher gains are to get, essentially.
Yeah.
You get those diminishing returns. However, those returns are also what separate you from everyone else. So if you put on 5 pounds of muscle as a beginner, it's probably noticeable, especially as if you're lean. Year to year, 5 pounds on beginner, you can see the difference. But 5 pounds on, an advanced natural lifter or an elite natural lifter, I mean, 5 pounds at the highest level, it could be the difference between, a World Natural Bodybuilding Federation title and like 6th or 8th 5 pounds is massive at that level, and it's visible too, right? Like 5 pounds, you can absolutely see the difference, especially when you're lean. Maybe the lats flare out a little bit more, like there's a little bit more roundness in the delts, the arms are visibly bigger, etc., the quad sweep or something. So the more gains you get, the harder it is to get them, but the more they actually matter, especially compared to other people. Now, I think this is part of the reason why some natural lifters are a little bit salty with regards to enhanced lifters, because they look at them as just sort of like jumping over this entire process and not having to fight for those tiny little gains at the end. They're just sort of, I mean, if you look at the best enhanced lifters, often they're like, not often, but there are 300-pound lean, like stage lean enhanced lifters, 300 pounds on stage. And these are not like 6'6" guys. These are like 5'6" guys in some cases, where they're just, 300 pounds. Whereas you look at the best natural guys, they're often under 200 pounds. They're often like 180, 170, 160, somewhere around there. And so, this is not icing on the cake, right? This is a massive difference. It could be almost 100 pounds of lean body mass, and possibly even more in some cases. So it does make a tremendous difference. And I think some natural lifters, and this has been me in the past, they get salty when they see someone absolutely blow up. But I think you have to realize, they're essentially trading their health and their longevity for muscle, right? And so I guess that's their decision. For me, I'm comfortable with the decisions that I've made. And, I kind of view it as two completely separate things, right? So I don't compare myself to enhanced lifters anymore. I used to, because that's kind of like just a pretty miserable road to go down.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I've found useful, and I've heard you talk about it a little bit, and it seems like it's also getting talked about in fitness circles a lot more, is deloads. I had Dr. Bill Campbell on, and he shared a study with me from his research review that I found really interesting. And obviously, none of these study designs are like perfect, but I think they had a group who trained linearly for like 6 months, as in they never took any deloads. And then there was one where they trained like, I want to say it was like 3 or 4 weeks on and then 2 weeks off. And by the end of the study, both of them were like neck and neck, like they were right on with each other.
Yeah, it's I've also seen a study where one group did 6 weeks on, 3 weeks off, 6 weeks on, and the other group did 15 weeks on. I think, what was the training age of these individuals? Were they fairly beginner? Or
if I recall correctly, I think they were fairly beginner. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure they were relatively new.
Yeah, I think that makes sense then, because the more muscle you gain, the further you have to fall. So if you're a beginner and then you make some gains, you're not going to lose those gains as easily.
Yeah.
And then you return to training, and then you just sort of keep going, and you return to training, you sort of keep going. But I think if you're advanced, deloading is one thing. Was this deloading or time off completely?
I think it might have been time off completely in this specific study.
Okay. So for me, I don't know any advanced natural lifter who takes huge amounts of time off on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
A lot of them do take, a week off a couple times a year, maybe 2 weeks off, but that's pushing it.
Yeah.
A couple times a year. But I don't know any who routinely, like every month, take a week off or something. Like off completely, away from the gym. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I will say that it's very unusual, because I think if you're the kind of person who wants to maximize their physique, you're probably going to hate being away from the gym anyway. And so if you really love training, I train every day. Because I enjoy it. I like it. And I think if you really love something, which you need to really do, you need to love training if you're going to achieve a very high level. If you kind of like just enjoy training a little bit, or you like it, then it's probably going to be tough to really put in the work and the time necessary. Now, is it possible? Yeah, maybe. But I think the people who have the mentality of really trying to push things probably won't end up training like that. It could, I mean, it could be effective. I'm not going to say that it's not. And I'm certainly not saying the results of the study are invalid. But I am saying it does kind of juxtapose with the observations of very, very high level lifters. So I think it's one of those things where beginners versus advanced, it does change. The game does change the closer you are to, you know, your hypothetical potential. If someone has to take a week off, they should absolutely feel free to do that occasionally. It's where it becomes a regular thing, where it messes up your work capacity, because then you go back to the gym and you're getting sore really easily, and you can't put in as many sets, and you have to readapt to training. Your work capacity goes down, your recovery capacity goes down, your being in tune with the movements also goes down. So some people do hit PRs after a week of almost no training. I absolutely cannot. I degraded performance ridiculously quickly. It sucks. Maybe this is partly because I don't take time off that frequently, probably once or twice a year, roughly on average. But when I do, I notice it. I notice it very, very quickly. And I even notice a very significant drop in body weight. So if I come back to training after, 10 days of not training, I usually go back to my wife's hometown for Chinese New Year in like January, February. Every year when I do it, I come back having lost like 5 or 6 pounds, despite eating a whole bunch of food. Our family's super nice, eating a whole bunch of food, not moving a lot, looking softer and fatter, to be frank. I'll show up and my weight will be down a significant amount. It happens every year. The first time it happened, I thought my scale was broken, but now I'm just kind of used to it. And so I basically reverse recomp. I get the opposite of what everyone wants. I don't know if I lose muscle, but I certainly lose glycogen, and I lose probably water that is in the muscle, essentially. And then I probably do gain fat because I'm less active and eating more. So I essentially reverse recomp. And then over the next few weeks, I actually recomp. And I do think it is maybe not necessarily good for long-term progress, but I think it is acceptable for long-term progress. And if you can't take a week off from training occasionally, I do think that is a problem mentally for most people, right? Because at that point, it's kind of like an addiction or a compulsion. And it's a good addiction to have, of all the addictions that, alcohol, cigarettes, like there are lots of addictions that people have that are not great. Training is a pretty decent one if you're going to pick one. But I do think being able to take a week off occasionally is probably a good idea. Maybe not necessarily for the physiological benefits or the resensitization, but more for the mental side of things. I mean, there is a world outside of the gym.
Yeah. So I found that deloads for me have helped actually quite a bit. And now I do like 4 days a week. So I'll do like a full body push, a full body pull, and then, repeat that. Usually the way that I program a deload is I'll just do like the regular workouts that I always do. And then like before, when I would do push-pull legs, I would just reduce the volume, but keep the intensity relatively high. So like instead of doing 6 sets in a workout, I may go down to 3 or 4. Now I'll just do the regular workout 2 days a week instead of 4 days of the week. And then I find that I'm usually pretty good the following week, because it seems like as long as your intensity is there, you're still going to get a stimulus and you're going to maintain. But as long as you're not just like going in and not working hard at all, then you're going to be generally okay. And I think some people, like you said, just want to say fuck it and take too much time off, but it's important you still kind of walk that fine line. So to me, what that study said is basically like, hey, you should program deloads in a smarter way, because taking like multiple weeks off is a bad idea. But if you just take like a day or a week off, or just do a little bit less intense training for a week, that's probably a good way to do it.
Yeah, and I auto-regulate them personally. I don't even necessarily refer to them as deloads. But if I'm having trouble warming up, or I feel beaten up, or I am losing the desire to train, and my motivation and desire to train is almost always very, very, very high. And so if it's like, if I go in and I'm just like, I don't know, I'm not really feeling it, that's a huge red flag. Like that to me is like, you've probably cooked things the past week or two.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know how to feel where that is, and I make adjustments. I mean, nowadays I make adjustments before I get to that point,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I can feel it. I know if I did like another set, then it's too much, right? Like the other day I did a set of RDLs, and one of the hardest sets I've ever done, like just very, very, very hard.
Yeah.
And I had been doing 2 or 3 sets. I did not do 2 or 3 sets that day. That one set was plenty. I could just sense I had done enough to stimulate muscle growth. Doing more would have been counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
There would have been not only no benefit, it would have been worse for progression because it would have been just excessively too much. And so I think being able to auto-regulate in that way is very, very beneficial. I think for strength, there is a case for reducing the load, reducing the weight on the bar, and keeping your sets just for technical purposes. So if you've been doing, say, a 3x5 with 100 kilos on something, okay, maybe your deload might be 3x5 with 80 kilos or 70 kilos, right? 70 or 80% or something like that, which should be very, very, very easy. Like that should be, I mean, that might be 10 reps in reserve for some people. That might be, yeah, it might be 10 reps in reserve, 12 reps in reserve. It'll be a lot of reps in reserve, right? But you're still getting that technical practice. Now, you don't want to drop this all the way down to like the bar because that's a different movement, right? Like squatting with the bar versus squatting 80% of the weight you were using. Those are essentially different movements, right? The bar is not enough weight to actually be training your technical proficiency because you essentially have to de-accelerate the bar. So if you're bench pressing and it's just the bar, you can't even put a lot of force into it because halfway through your body's like, oh, well, you start using your back in a way that you wouldn't on a normal bench because you have to anticipate not throwing the bar through the ceiling. And so it's essentially a different movement. So I think if I see someone deload and they go from, less than half of their weights, I think that is probably not a good idea.
All right, guys. I'm absolutely thrilled with the show's new sponsor. I am now sponsored and have an affiliate through LMNT electrolytes. I've used these electrolytes for years. Back when I used to do a lot of fasting, in fact, I used to drink sometimes I want to say up to 7 a day, 7 little packets. So the packets are full of all the electrolytes that you need to perform and hydrate yourself properly. You need sodium for pretty much every single function in your body, despite what a lot of people may tell you. Sodium doesn't actually cause a lot of the issues that people kind of would have you believe. So just real quick to give you a little bit of facts. You don't need sugar to hydrate. Electrolytes and water don't require glucose to pass through the gut. The average American consumes over 60 pounds of sugar a year. And when it comes to athletic performance, you can actually lose up to 7 grams per day in hot climate. So make sure you click on the affiliate link below to get all your hydration needs. And like I said, I'm super stoked to have these guys teamed up with the podcast, and just make sure you get your electrolytes through Element. All right, guys, thanks.
But chopping some weight off, 20, 30% somewhere around there could be useful. And then keeping the same volume, which should be very, very easy, keeps you in tune with the movement, and allows for fatigue management and recovery. But for muscle growth, usually the movements are less technical, so that's not as much of a concern. Usually you're not doing lower reps anyway, and those tend to be less technical. Like sets of 8, 10, 12, 15, typical hypertrophy stuff, it's not that technical. A 1 rep max is very technical, especially on some movements, because you don't really have a chance to sort of feel a movement out. It's just one and done. Same for a double, a triple, quite technical. So bodybuilding is just less technical in general. The movements are usually a little bit more isolated, a little bit lighter. Like a dumbbell bench press versus a barbell bench press, dumbbells are a little bit lighter, right? Which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but it does mean that it's usually less technical. You're not like setting up for your dumbbell bench press and like really, arching and stuff and getting leg drive and stuff. No, it's more isolated. For bodybuilding training, I like doing pretty similar to what you do, to where you reduce the sets, but you keep the effort. Maybe keep an extra rep or 2 in the tank, just because I think when someone gets very, very big and very, very strong, even doing one hard set, if it's to failure, could be enough fatigue that it gets rid of the deload anyway, right? So I think for most people, reducing the volume is a good idea for bodybuilding style training. And then you could also maybe keep an extra rep or two in reserve. For me, if I'm doing most of my work either very close to failure or to failure or beyond failure, for me, 1 rep in reserve is a deload. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, 1 rep in reserve, like that's the end of my mesocycle. Like they do sort of the typical 4 reps in reserve 1 week, then 3 reps in reserve, 2, 1, then maybe 0 reps in reserve, and then they deload, then they start again at 4, 3, 2, 1, etc. But my deload is 1 or 2 reps in reserve. And to them, like it, they like it's a complete opposite, because what caused them a lot of fatigue is actually freshening me up. But that's just because that's what I'm used to, right? It's not necessarily that, oh, I'm so hardcore, look at me. It's just that is what works best for me, right? Like if someone can get results on 10 reps in reserve, more power to them, right? Like that's lower risk of injury, lower effort, lower chance of burnout. And so if you can make progress with a whole bunch of reps in reserve, to me, that's not necessarily a bad thing until you can't make progress, right? So it does depend on, are you progressing? And this is where a training log is absolutely essential. I'm amazed by how many people message me. They don't have a training log, right? They're wondering about something and they're not even tracking the progress. Track your progress, people. That is going to be the only way that you know if something is working or not working.
Yeah, so one thing there also is like the neuromuscular adaptations when it comes to doing heavier stuff. I was listening to Iron Culture this morning, and I remember them going over a study, where they had mentioned that people doing a leg press, I think it was in this one study, they were doing more weight, but they actually didn't grow any muscle, and it was strictly because they were learning the neuromuscular adaptation with doing like a leg press or something like that, because some of those higher difficulty reps, like, the last couple reps on a bench press or a deadlift or a back squat, some of that is just like the pure grinding through that rep, where like if you first start out, you're not going to be used to that. You don't know how to overcome that. But though, as you get more and more sufficiently trained, you kind of know like, okay, I have to grit my teeth and just fucking push on through this.
Yeah, no, it's, I would say most movements are more technical than most people think. So we tend to think of like, oh, technical movements, clean and jerk or snatch, or calisthenics, maybe some kind of skill movement, like a human flag or something like that. But I think actually a lot of machines and isolations are more technical than most people think. So, something like a standing barbell curl, you might think, oh, it's an isolation movement, therefore it's not going to be technical. Well, the delts are still working a bit. Even with strict form, you're still getting, delt activation. You can see this when someone is lean. If they do a curl, you can see like their delts actually fire up as they're lifting the weight just to stabilize. The scapula as well. So the upper back, the traps, the rhomboids. Because when you curl, you have this big weight out in front of you. And so, it is working the shoulders to keep everything stabilized. Right. So, of course, it's working your biceps, it's working your forearms, it's working your lower back. Right, your spinal erectors, to keep everything upright and locked in. Right, you have a pretty significant weight. Could be. I'll usually curl with I don't do barbell curls much, but if I was to run a mesocycle of barbell curls, I'd probably be using probably a little bit over a plate per side, so like 60-ish kilos, 135, and I mean that's a pretty significant amount of weight in front of you. And it's pretty significantly in front of you, especially if you have, long monkey arms. And so that does require a lot of bracing of the core, a lot of spinal erectors, hips, glutes, even quads, and then coordination just to keep everything locked in, especially with a heavier weight. And that's with strict form. That's with strict form. Once you start, talking about potentially beyond failure stuff, I mean, that's where you have even more potential for it to be technical. And so then you even go into like machines. I find machines not to be as technical as free weights. Obviously, that's kind of the whole point. but you will see this quick jump in performance, whereas you might not get that later. So for example, if I started a new machine in the gym, let's go with the leg press, the first few workouts, I'm butchering the PRs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every week I'm getting many more reps or adding weight very, very quickly at a rate that is absolutely not indicative of muscular growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I've been doing deep leg presses lately, and I'm probably using 20 or 30% more weight than I did my first session. My legs are not 20 to 30% bigger by any means. The majority of that is just neuromuscular coordination. It's learning the movement. It's your body sort of adapting to the joint positions. There could be some Golgi tendon organ stuff going on to sort of release your ability to produce force. But a lot of people, they see that quick jump in progress and they think, oh my God, this movement is amazing. And then the progress slows because it will once you've made those adaptations. Now you're building muscle. Now it's your actual muscles that are adapting because those other adaptations have taken place, which are essentially cheaper. Your body's a miserly, stingy MFer. And so it doesn't want to build muscle because muscle is expensive. It's tangible. It's tissue. It's something that your body has to actually create. Whereas optimizing the central nervous system, the joint structures, stiffness, passive tendon, etc. I mean, that is quick. It's relatively quick and easy and cheap. So your body will do that first. The trouble is when people see this slowing progress, which is good because it means it's actually what is getting them to their goals. And they're like, oh, the movement's done. Time to swap it out.
Time to change programs.
Yeah, time to move on to another movement so I can get that quick progress, right? They don't realize the quick progress they're making is not the progress they actually want to be making, right? And so I tend to keep movements in my program much longer than I used to. I used to be not necessarily a program hopper, but I would be an exercise hopper for sure. Like this month would be the front squat month. Like, oh, this is going to be the thing. And so I would make that quick progress. Then I would kind of just get bored of it. And I would find the new thing that was going to get me big. Except it didn't, because I didn't actually give it long enough. And so I'd be, rotating through movements super, super quickly. And there is something to be said for that from an injury prevention standpoint. At the very least, you're not necessarily going to get as banged up because you are trying something new. But I also think it can limit progress in the long term for sure. And right now, I will milk a movement for all it's worth before I swap it out, because I think I'm just getting more out of it. And this also goes back to that delayed gratification, because you're seeing slower progress. I mean, on incline dumbbell curls, I might gain like 5 reps, maybe 6 reps with a given weight in a year. And so it's a rep every couple months. But it's real progress. It doesn't feel as good as, constantly messing with the bench to try to find the perfect angle or, doing pause reps this week and then tempo reps next week. And then, the gym got new dumbbells. And so now I need to try these and, just consistent, slow progress week to week to week and month to month, which again can be hard to notice and hard to measure. But that's real progress. And that's the real progress that actually adds up to the goals that, I want to get to.
Yeah. So one thing that you've also mentioned in your videos is kind of you being a workhorse. And I don't want to say I'm the same way, but like when it comes to working in like the heavier movements, I find myself, I like doing higher volumes. And like, for me, my hamstrings can't tolerate an insane amount of volume because I just get crazy sore. My back is kind of the same way. My chest and my quads, I could beat the living shit out of and they won't get sore, at least not like that bad. My chest maybe a little bit, but like my quads, just like I can't do anything to get them sore. But, I do hit them pretty freaking hard. But, kind of to that neuromuscular adaptations, to sit down and do a set of like 15 squats when they're nice and heavy, that sucks. I mean, that really sucks. But that's probably what a lot of people need to do, because I think I also heard you touch on like people just wanting to go for 1 rep max, 1 rep max, 1 rep max. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you draw it out and really grind out a set of like 15, maybe even 20, and that will actually probably complement your 1 rep max, but you're just going to have to be patient and kind of let that play out over the long term.
Yeah. Ed Cohen used to write out his entire training cycles for like 10 or 12 weeks at a time, and he would write out like the whole year of training cycles. So it'd be like 5 separate, maybe 4 or 5, I forget which, 4 or 5 training cycles, each one like a 10-week block or something, or 12-week block. It was either 5 times 10 weeks or 4 times 12 weeks. And every time he would just up the weight by a very small amount on every single movement. So he would add like 5 pounds or 10 pounds to every single movement. And he would just do that 4 or 5 times a year, and greatest of all time, right? Like, and so I think there is something to be said for these little tiny jumps, this consistency, and a lot of people are definitely lacking it. And you know, it's tough at times. Sometimes you think you're not doing enough. Sometimes you think you're doing too much. But you know, by being observant, you can sort of tell what you are going to need to get to your goals over time. And then being observant and making small tweaks and changes are what are going to get the job done. Not like hopping programs or not completely switching things up. You know, if someone wants to do that, that's fine. But doing that too much is definitely not the best for long-term progress.
Yeah. So, I have, it's kind of funny to look back at like the hype and everything around testosterone. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because it seems like all of it is like gone. And that was such a big push like a year or two ago. And it's kind of like, it's emblematic of the fitness industry, where there's like this new product that's going to get you all the gains, and then it comes and there's a whole bunch of hype, and then it just disappears into the ether, and now no one like talks about it. But it seems like kind of like the mainstays are like creatine, beta alanine to a lesser degree, and then caffeine, are kind of like the 3 staples. You know, your branch chains for tasty water, they don't really seem to have any effect, but like a lot of the other stuff just seems to kind of like come and go.
Yeah, no, it's and one thing I can guarantee is that testosterone will not be the last one. There's going to be something else, you know, in a year or two, that is going to be like the thing that you need to be taking to maximize muscle growth. And you're right that a lot of these don't stick around. I would be very skeptical of a lot of the studies. A lot of them either have no studies or they have one study. And by the way, statistical error, like just because something is statistically significant, well, usually we use a p-value of 0.05. So there's a 5% chance that it could be significant without actually being significant, right? So, and then a lot of studies are poorly designed. Industry funding, big issue, I think. You know, you look at who funded the study. Oh, the company making the supplement. Wow, like what a shocking, right? Really surprising. And then, you know, other companies can't seem to replicate the findings.
Yeah.
You know? And so, yeah, I take creatine. And I actually had a video on creatine a while back, saying that it caused me to lose my hair back in 2019. I think actually it was probably just stress. I think it was probably just like, you know, being newly married and then not having a stable job and just rushing around. Plus, I couldn't afford to bulk, so I just cut. And so I was spending, you know, most of that year with like veins all in my abs and just rushing around doing bullshit, you know, jobs and stuff like that. And so I think it was just stress. I think it was just, you know, being sort of not as mindful about that kind of thing. And now I actually handle stress a lot better. And so I've been taking creatine again for the past, I don't know, year or so. And seems to be pretty much okay.
Got a better head of hair than me.
Yeah, thanks. So I take creatine. I think that's good. I do notice a bump. Actually, this cut, when I started taking it, I noted it in my weight, my morning body weight tab in my Excel spreadsheet. And when I started taking creatine, I stopped losing weight, and the scale creeped up 3-4 pounds over the course of a week or two, while I was looking leaner. So it was just like water retention inside the muscle. So you too can gain 4 pounds of muscle in a month. Buy my creatine. Discount code affiliate link in the bio. But you know, is that actually muscle? Not really. It's just water that is in the muscle, and muscles are 70% water. Yeah, it's not really muscle, because if you stop using it, you lose that right away. But I do think there are cognitive benefits. It's fairly affordable as well, and so I think creatine is a pretty good supplement for most people who are, you know, into this whole lifting weights and getting jacked thing. And then I take casein protein powder, mostly out of convenience. And partly when you're cutting, maybe your fats are going to be low, your carbs are going to be low, but you want your protein to be relatively high. And so at a certain point, it becomes difficult to shuffle all the macros around. And I don't count, but I also know that if I did not take in protein powder, my protein would probably be lower than it should. So I just, you know, huck back a couple of those per day. That's an extra like 50 grams or so of protein. And that gets me somewhere that is probably better than it would be. You know, without it, I might be 100 grams. I don't know, somewhere around there. I don't know. I actually haven't counted at all in a few years, which people are always surprised when I say that. But I do take casein, and then coffee as well. So those are basically and there's some vitamin C gummies up there that my wife got, but those aren't even really important. Oh, and then fish oil. So that's basically the 4 that I take: creatine, casein, fish oil, and occasionally a vitamin C gummy when I remember. But I'm pretty minimalistic when it comes to supplements. I will never be endorsed by a supplement company, because there's no company that I could get behind, because most of the stuff they sell would be something I would never ever use. Right. So lots of supplement companies have reached out to me. One of them I actually considered, just because it was someone who I really looked up to when I first got into fitness. And he owns a supplement company, but the package actually got stopped at the border and sent back because of Chinese customs for whatever reason. And so, it didn't end up going through. And actually, I think it's for the best, just because, I'm pretty minimalistic when it comes to a lot of things. And so it's not really something that I could stand behind.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that I've noticed that's been consistent about you, is that you're not a charlatan. I do see people who, as soon as they start to get a little bit bigger, then now every 2 seconds of their video, they're plugging supplements, they're plugging this, they're plugging that. And I know you just recently signed up with, I can't remember the company's name off the top of my head, but obviously you know it, that has reputable people, some of the people that we've been talking about throughout the show, to kind of sell your programming. So, yeah, dude, we've got for about an hour and a half, so I think that might be a good place to kind of cut it off there. And yeah, dude, if you don't got anything else, tell people where they could find your training stuff, because I think I kind of tied that in good there.
The company that you mentioned is Boost Camp.
That's it.
And for me, I'm a dealer of information, essentially, because I think for most people, information and inspiration are kind of like the two things that they need. Some people need neither. That's not that common. Some people need one. A lot of people need both. And, so having a company that puts out good information is, it's a perfect fit, really. So my programs are up on there on the Boost Camp app. They've been fantastic to work with. And if someone wants to check out my books, it's verityfit.com. I'm working on my nutrition book now, which will be out in probably 6, 7, 8 months or so. So it takes a while to write, these books, and usually they're like 60, 70,000 words, and a lot goes into them. So it'll hopefully be by the end of the year, just because it is a long process. And then my YouTube channel is Geoffrey Verity Schofield. And I think that's also my name on Instagram as well.
Good stuff, man. Yeah, well, we'll definitely have you back on whenever you get the nutrition book out. I'm interested to see and read about it because there's just so much bullshit in the nutrition realm. You know just as well as I do. So, yeah, man, if there is something else you wanted to hit on, go ahead. And if not, we'll close her out.
No, just I want to say thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this. And if you have me back, happy to show up whenever.
For sure, man. All right. Well, hopefully everybody enjoyed the conversation. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and check out the links below for all the stuff I got going on, and follow me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, wherever, whatever. And yeah, guys, thanks for listening. And until next time, see you later.